Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. We're letting everyone in and we'll start in about a minute.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, let's get started. Good morning and welcome to the Northwest Illinois Volunteerism Conference hosted by the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence and the Leadership Exchange on Volunteerism, with support from Serve Illinois Commission, AJ Gallagher and Company, and Imperial Punch of Rockford. So as many of you know, each month we have sessions that include a 1-hour presentation, followed by a 1-hour group discussion moderated by our friend, Martisha Brown. It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, who will be speaking on the topic, Are we asking the right questions? Sarah Davis is a freelance consultant and co-founder of 42 Compass. 42 Compass is a consulting firm helping to create strategic volunteer recruitment and retention plans, providing training and fundraising plans for nonprofit organizations. Sarah has 15 years of experience in the nonprofit world as a recruiter, engager, and trainer. Please help me welcome Sarah Davis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen here really quick, and then we'll get started. All right. If everyone can see my screen, that's great. If you can't, let me know, and we will get that fixed. All right. I'm going to make you guys bigger here so I can see everybody. I want to see all your faces, at least those that are showing me their faces. All right, welcome and thank you for being here in person. And I'm going to thank those who are listening to the recording because we know some of them are going to do that afterwards. We know our lives are crazy, so I appreciate any of the time that you have to participate. And before we get started, I want you to truly participate. This presentation is all about questions, and questions obviously need answers, right? So as we go along, we will have you type answers in the chat or even open up the mic to answer the question verbally. I know we have a ton of time at the end for discussion, but participation throughout makes everything a little more engaging. Thanks to Billy and the team there at NCNE to make all of this happen, and her patience with me as I sent my PowerPoint a little bit too late, but I appreciate her time. And I want to thank Brian, my co-presenter today, and I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit because he's coming with some experience that I don't have over the last year with directly related to COVID and nonprofits. So I'm going to let him introduce himself and we'll get into some of that more COVID related questions towards the end. Brian?
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Nestler. I'm the Regional Disaster Response Manager for State of Illinois for the American Red Cross. Sarah and I actually got to know each other through doing disaster work for the Red Cross. We actually have been able to actually collaborate on a couple different things, including instructing some classes, doing different things, and was honored to be asked to participate and really pitch in and give a different perspective, I think, on some of these things. We have some great questions we're going to be talking about today. Really at the core of this is how are we developing volunteers? How are we, bringing them in, really making them feel welcome, feel needed, feel wanted, all those different things. I'm really looking forward to sharing all the different experiences. So just happy to be here, and thanks to Nickney, and thanks to everybody here for spending some time with us on a Wednesday morning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. And now we're going to get into our actual presentation, which is great. I started in nonprofit work a while ago with the PTA in Michigan. I never knew the PTA had paid staff until then. It was one of my first jobs. It was an amazing first nonprofit adventure. I met students and parents and teachers and administrators, and it was a unique way to look at the state that I lived in my whole life. That position taught me a lot of things, how nonprofits run. Moreover, it taught me how grant paperwork can drive you completely loony, and much, much more. But there are two things that I learned that I didn't really understand in that first job until it hit me a few years later. One was to make sure your volunteers are happy. And this does not mean we're buying them a Lamborghini. This doesn't mean that we are, buying them lunch every day or spending a ton of money. It's about asking the right questions and gearing the volunteer position to what they need. And then we want to make sure that they're engaged in the mission and not just waiting for the next task. We all have those volunteers that come in and are like, what should I do? What is my job today? Your volunteers should be engaged in the mission enough and know what their job duties are enough that they come in ready to work for the day. And this leads me to where we are with this presentation. Are nonprofits asking the right questions before and during a volunteer's career to ensure they are happy and engaged? We all hope we do, but we all know we can do better with it. We want a better recruitment effort, and we want better engagement and retention. These questions are just one small concept that can help us create that environment and get us to where we want to be with our nonprofits and making sure those volunteers are happy. Let's get into our questions. So we are here. Before a volunteer begins, I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
So our first question, go ahead and click. Is there a happy medium between their wants and our needs? How many times have we created this idea of a perfect person we want to come in and volunteer for the organization? We have an idea in mind. We have a position they need to fill. We want them to be graced with multiple postgraduate degrees, fluent in 7 languages, understand how to create a website that will rank #1 on a Google search, all the while being the most congenial person that you'll ever meet, with amazing friends just looking to donate money to the organization. We create all these different things. We put all these different ideas into somebody, and really, all of a sudden becomes the impossible individual. If you find that person, by all means, make sure you do everything you can to keep them. But we focus more on conveying our needs, finding that perfect unpaid employee. What happens when we do this, we scare away our potential volunteers. Maybe they only know 5 languages. Maybe their website creation skills just aren't really, be able to rank #1 on Google. We wanted to make sure that we're actually, not intimidating folks that actually might be interested in being with our organization. And if there isn't a clear path to show other abilities and experience can help the organization, let's face it, they might actually go somewhere else. They might actually, they might just pass on being a part of the organization. And instead of getting those people that might have different backgrounds and rich experiences and different things that they can add to that, we never even knew what we had and we lost because it never even happened. Where's an impractical expectation? And this is actually a question for the group. Where is an impractical expectation of the volunteer can do to create an unrealistic scenario of potential volunteers you were looking for? When did we create that situation where it was just never going to happen? Anybody have any ideas if they want to come off mute and go ahead and do that, or chat in the chat box? And by the way, this is one of these things, and I'll kind of take a side note here. Sarah and I are going to be continuously asking questions through this of you guys, because we want you to participate. We want to hear your experience in these things. So like I said, when has an impractical expectation of what a volunteer can do created an unrealistic scenario for you. And I will warn the group, Sarah and I, who have taught a virtual class together, if we don't have anybody participating, we're going to start calling on people.
Go ahead, Barb.
In my position, I'm a recruitment specialist with the Forest Preserve District of Will County. And our expectation of a good volunteer is someone who is willing to take direction and someone who is willing to learn. Obviously, that's everybody's choice. However, when we have a volunteer that comes in, we let them know what they're going to be doing specifically. Say if they're going to be working on a resource management workday that involves lifting, carrying brush to a brush pile, throwing it onto the brush pile. You know, there are some things that, you know, are a little bit different than a usual volunteer situation. And sometimes the people are like, oh yes, I can do that, it's all great and yada yada. But once they get there, it's not what they were expecting. It's not, you know, oh, I'm lifting heavier branches. These are long. These are like 8 feet long. I can't do that. So when that occurs, we also let them know that there is diversification within our organization. There are things that they can do if they choose to. So we ask them, what do you like to do? What are your special skills? Do you take good pictures? Are you good with people? Are you good with crafts? Things like that. So we, you know, we also allow them to find their little niche within our organization other than what they first set out to do.
That is wonderful, because that encompasses a few of the slides that we're going to cover here in a little bit more.
I was just going to say, you were the perfect preview person for several other concepts we're going to be talking about. So thank you for sharing that.
Sorry to steal your thunder.
No. It really sets the stage, because these things all do come together. These things all are part of, you know, all the different things when we talk about, you know, are we asking all those right questions? It's amazing. You touch on a few different points right away. You know, really what we want to do is we want to make sure our volunteers align with our mission. And it's something, Barb, you spoke with. You know, it's like, are you interested in being part of, you know, that conservation effort, and, you know, being a part of what the forest preserve needs? That's, you know, that's great. And we find those folks, you know, are, you know, if we can find those folks that do that, that's great. What we don't want to do, you know, and I threw an example here. I'm like, people hate music, you know, assisting a local symphony. You know, it's just never going to jive. But if somebody actually does enjoy the outdoors, they're going to make that, they're going to find that niche, even if they can't necessarily swing around 10-foot branches that might weigh 50 pounds, you know. And I mean, you know, a lot of times I'm guessing people thought they were going to come and rake leaves and pick up twigs. And it's like, no, there's serious work we got to do here. Also, one of the other things we want to make sure we stop doing is making assumptions about volunteers based purely on the professional resume. I'm going to turn over to Sarah, has a great experience to share regarding this very thing.
Yes. So at the Red Cross, when I started a couple of years ago, I was there for maybe 3 months. I had met all the volunteers that worked in my area, and that was great. And there was this one woman named Melissa who had been a nurse her whole career. And when she came over to volunteer with the Red Cross, they found out she was a nurse, and they were super excited because the Red Cross is always low on nurses, right? And so they literally pigeonholed her into that position, and she hated it. And every person she told that she hated it, she was like, I don't want to do the same thing that I've done my whole life. And we didn't listen to her wants. No one did. And I literally removed her from that position and put her into feeding. She started feeding people in disasters instead of helping them with their health-related needs. And she is much more happy. She's deploying all over the country, even still today, to do feeding. And it really made a difference that somebody was listening. No one actually listened to her that that's not what she wanted to do. And I think it's not only about what our needs are, but it has to be about what the volunteer wants to do. And sometimes it's about their needs. And I think that leads us into a lot of examples that are going to come up in the next, few slides, about the basic questions on how to ensure the Melissas of the world aren't feeling like they don't have a choice and aren't feeling like the nonprofit needs are trumping their wants. There has to be that happy medium. We have narrowed down our questions into 4 categories. Prospective questions, before they become a volunteer. Orientation questions when they're sitting there on their first day with you or first week or however you guys do it. Retention questions. And then at the end, we're going to do COVID-esque questions. The first ones we're going to talk about are prospective questions. These are like those questions that pop up when you're applying for a job on LinkedIn or the questionnaire you fill out at the doctor's appointment before you go in. They're necessary, but they're not overly complicated, right? Unless you don't remember your kids' birthdays and then it gets complicated. But there are a million more questions that you can use that then we will reference actually here. This is truly just the start of the conversation. And we hope that each of you take this back to your nonprofits to develop even more questions or more processes revolved around this. So we're going to start with what is their motivation for volunteering? And I'll hand over the first section to Brian.
Well, as we know, everyone has a reason for volunteering or even working at a nonprofit. Sometimes it's about a great mission, sometimes about a combination of various other things. First question I'm going to put to our group here is, what's the unique thing that draws volunteers to your organization, your mission? If anybody wants to speak up on that. Come off mute or go ahead and put something in the chat box.
Martisha, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes, I would definitely say the motivation for individuals volunteering for the RACVB is often the heart behind our events. So for example, Stroll on State, it's just a great opportunity to give back to the community. And also it's a very visual opportunity to give back to the community. Individuals will see you with your volunteer shirt on. They'll see you out and about helping to set up the decoration. So I think it's kind of a 2-for-1 to feel good. And that it's actually a great opportunity for others to see that you're doing the work.
That's
Absolutely.
In the chat, Cheryl said that helping youth grow and succeed. Obviously, helping youth is an obvious draw for a lot of people, and a sense of community is what Marcia said. And then actually helping with the nature preserve, the conservation side of it is what Kate said. So
Outstanding. And all those things are those unique draws to what to what your organization does in the world, why that mission is important. Some things that obviously come to mind when we talk about these things is and we kind of mentioned a little bit, is contribute to a cause that you care about. Animal lovers will find a local shelter, ASPCA, habit, and do that for because they care about animals. That's obviously an easy match. I, for one, my background was in emergency management, so being drawn to the Red Cross and its disaster response stuff was a natural draw for me. Service hours or community service. Some volunteers do come to us less than enthusiastic about donating their time. They need to fulfill, a specific service requirement, sometimes mandated by a court, sometimes even just mandated by perhaps a college program they're doing, or or high school or whatever else. But those are people that still present opportunities for us. I mean, in some cases we can convert those folks into people that might be actually interested in continuing on even past those prescribed hours. Kind of dovetailing with what I mentioned before, college courses or capstone requirements sometimes require us to volunteer for an organization to get some experience hours in with somebody. Somebody mentioned this actually in the chat. Empty nesters looking for some time away from home. The kids are out of the house, you realize you're bored on the weekends, you want to do something to fill your time, and you've been active how long? I mean, it's funny, my kids are definitely not out of the house yet. I'm going all the time. You know, I mean, I'm going to practices, I'm picking people up, I'm running them, you know, here, there, and everywhere. It's kind of, you know, I think it's kind of hard sometimes for people to settle down and do nothing all of a sudden. You know, they're gone, but I'm still used to having weekends that are crazy. It's a great opportunity for people to channel that energy into something worthwhile. Are they a family looking to do some good work together, you know, and really bringing together a whole family? You know, a lady might have organized her 6 kids to you know, adopt families over the holiday and did presents, cookies, a bunch of other things as a complete family to give back to 6 other families that needed it. You know, it's a great opportunity to say to people, you know, say to your family, hey, let's do this as a group. And somebody else mentioned this too. I think that that definitely, you know, does this, connecting with your community, delivering meals on wheels, you know, or serving at soup kitchens, or simply folding clothes at the Goodwill, all make a difference to, you know, allow people to connect with the community directly, make sure that they're doing things. You know, so obviously we have some great, you know, different ideas here. COVID has created some unique challenges in getting these volunteers. As we mentioned before, we're going to speak to a little more about this later in the presentation. We have some definitely stuff that is unique to, you know, and very prescient to the things we're dealing with right now. But why does this even all matter? Knowing allows you to gear your volunteer positions to the right community. It takes so much work to find the right fit. By collecting this information, in addition to demographic information that about your volunteers, you can ensure that the right community is targeted in your recruitment outreaches. Also, by finding like-minded people, you'll work to create a better sense of community within their volunteer, you know, ranks. Imagine if you knew that 45% of your volunteers are 55 and above and looking for a way to stay busy. That's going to help you, you know, find those right folks and target your efforts appropriately. If 20% of your volunteers are college students looking for experience, you know how to create that experience for them and actually start to channel people in and really, you know, create that that experience for them. You know, knowing those things allows you to go ahead and have, you know, really effective recruitment targeting, or recruiting targeting. So I think then we move on to our next slide, and Sarah's going to talk about a little bit about capacity.
Yes, and capacity is one of those buzzwords, right? Prior to everybody coming on here, we talked about how nonprofits had to pivot during COVID, and I think capacity is also one of those words that tends to be a little bit overused, right? We need to build capacity. We need to increase the nonprofits, you know, organization's ability to fulfill its mission. We need to do all of these things, but capacity actually has a few definitions. The one we're using today is actually the individual ability, power to do or experience or understand something. So it's an individual's capacity to actually perform the thing we want them to do. Sometimes we look too much at just getting a body through the door, and we lose our focus on if that person is the best fit. And we need to look at what they can do and want to do and not make assumptions, not assume Melissa wants to be a nurse. We want to ask her what she wants to do in her volunteer role. This is the time that I want to open up mics again, or, you know, definitely make sure that you're putting your thoughts into the chat box there. What do you think are some of the factors that contribute to a volunteer's capacity to do the job? And I want to clarify this a little bit, because somebody sent me a private message. Not all of the nonprofits are run by paid staff, and we completely understand that. We are both associated with the Red Cross right now, which is at a little bit different level than some of other nonprofits. But I come from some very small nonprofits too. I've worked with some military nonprofits that had 0 paid staff. And I was like literally the part-time 5-hour-a-week consultant that was trying to help them get everything running around. So what factors do you think contribute to the volunteer's capacity to do the job? Do you guys have any ideas? Oh, time, definitely. Yep, and that was actually the first thing on my little list here. Love it, Colleen and Marcia. And that's true with parents, especially. Parents have time with their kids things going on, plus work, plus all the other things that come up with life. But also in regards to time, are they here for a single day event, right? Do you guys just have an annual event that you need, 50 volunteers for, and those people show up for one day? Or are they here for a summer? Or are they really here for a long-term commitment, right? Time can mean a lot of things, right? Do they physically have the time to get there? But also, what is their actual commitment for that? Yes, tech skills. I'm going to get to that in a second. And physical abilities, love them. So next is energy. Some people come in on that first day and they have a conquer the world attitude, right? They are going to save all the puppies, and they are going to save all the children, and they're going to do all the things on day one, right? They're going to plant all the trees. And at the end of 30 days, they are burnt out because they came in with that conquer the world attitude. And I don't want to extinguish that, but we do have to work on containing that so that we can expand that energy and keep them as a volunteer longer. So when somebody comes in with that conquer the world attitude, having that conversation with them that we can't save the world in 30 days, because if we could, the nonprofit you're coming to wouldn't exist. So we it's an ongoing project, it's an ongoing plan, and we need everybody to be there longer term. So then we have psychological. Can they handle some of the harder aspects of the job? The jobs that some of you, some of the nonprofits that you guys work for may be hard mentally. If somebody's volunteering for, say, the Humane Society or the Red Cross, death may come up on a regular basis, and some people can't handle that, right? Or if you really are passionate about, conservation, and you are working with, trying to save forests, and the forests are being taken away more quickly than we're building them, or I should say planting them, it can take a lot out of you mentally. And so we need to think about, can they handle some of the harder aspects of the job psychologically? And that's a hard question to ask, but you can ask certain things to say, are you ready for this? Give examples, would you be able to handle this? And perhaps, you can gear them to other aspects of your organization versus directly working with your clients or your concerns. Physical capabilities. We talked about this a little bit, lifting things, walking a lot, outside in the sun. Love Brian to death, but he can't be out in the sun for very long with that Irish skin he has without a lot of sunscreen. And so, are we encouraging people to, take care of themselves and pick the best position within the organization that will adhere to their physical capabilities? And this isn't even about, we could get into different things with disabilities or needs to accommodate that. This is really just the day-to-day things, asking them, can you lift things? Can you get from point A to point B in the timely manner that we need you to? Are you able to sit outside at an all-day event? Those are things that we need to make sure that we're looking into. And finally, technological prowess. I know that somebody mentioned this earlier. Ruth up there mentioned this earlier. This was probably, I don't know, 7 years ago now. We got a volunteer at one of the military nonprofits I was working for, and somebody handed this 20-year-old, and I say kid, but 20-year-old kid, a paper and said, here, will you fax this? And the kid, literally the look on his face was like, I don't even know what a fax machine is, let alone why do you still have one, right? And on the flip side of that, I've come across those more seasoned volunteers that still have a flip phone, and they don't know how to work a laptop or do a spreadsheet or the things that we may need them to do on a daily basis. So having those conversations might alleviate some of the hard conversations you will need to have, or the training on a fax machine that you will need to have, right? And I say technological prowess because it isn't about old or young. It's about what is their experience and what are they used to taking care of or doing in their day-to-day life. And finally, all of these conversations regarding capacity are to utilize these pieces of information in ways that will make them not feel useless, stupid, or less than, right? We don't want the 20-year-old feeling like he's stupid because he doesn't know how to use a fax machine, because the rest of us have been using them for 40 years or whatever we have. But we don't also want somebody to feel like they're not a good volunteer because they wouldn't be able to handle the psychological aspect of the job. We want to ask the questions in the right way and have a good conversation so that people are feeling worth becoming a volunteer. Okay. Our next question is, how do you think past experiences may impact volunteers at your organization? I'm going to hand it over to Brian here to start things going.
Outstanding. No, I mean, as we know, everyone comes in with preconceptions when they become involved in an organization. These experiences can come from family, workplaces, previous volunteer, positions that they might have held. How do you think those experiences have impacted those prospective volunteers? And that's actually a question for everybody, on the line here. If they want to come off mute or put in the chat box, how do you think those experiences impact your new prospective volunteers?
Go ahead. I thought I saw somebody raise their hand, so. All right.
I can't see everyone, but can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I would definitely say, and I'm kind of just going back to Stroll on State. I think it's because my brain has been working on sponsorships and things like that for Stroll on State, but it's a holiday focused event. And I think that their past experience of actually attending the event really helps to promote them volunteering. I think just even overall, just that experience of attending our events really helps as we think about our volunteers.
Absolutely. Okay. No, that's great. Marcia says if they had a negative experience, reassure them. Absolutely. And that's a little bit we're going to dive into is, we will get both those negative and those positive, experiences that will influence those things. I'm going to first talk about the negative side. By asking what they didn't like about their last volunteer position, we can begin to see what kind of volunteer they'll be. They tell you that the food was bad at their volunteering events for the previous organization they were at, or they weren't fed, they felt like they weren't fed as frequently as they should have been. That might tell you a lot about what kind of a volunteer they're going to be at and what's going to be really important to them. Did they question the leadership of the organization, the strategy, fundraising, or some other aspects of it? While there can be legitimacy of level legitimacy to some of those complaints, beware if this person leads with a negative and tends to dwell on it. It may inform you about what kind of person that's going to be in your organization. While we want to reassure people that typically did have a negative experience, we want to evaluate, is this person going to really, move forward with our mission in mind and doing different things like that? Can we go ahead and, as Marcia said, we can reassure them and we can actually say, hey, listen, that experience was maybe not as ideal, but you can, you'll see some better things here because we run, an amazing organization. The good news is there's also positives that people can bring to it. And I'm going to let Sarah go ahead and get to those.
Yes, I was actually just replying to Martisha. I haven't hit send yet. So positive or negative experiences on being thanked. That is definitely 100%.
Yes.
We want to inquire what they loved about their last volunteer experience also. So if this is their first one, then inquire what they loved about their past workplace atmosphere or culture. For me, I'm personally an introvert, which is surprising because I know most people don't do this type of thing when they're an introvert. But one of the things that I actually love about the atmosphere I work in and volunteer in is the virtual environment. I can be on for a short period of time and then recover in my introverted world. I was truly born for the virtual training world of COVID. But the reason I bring that up is because I am very upfront about that when I come into a volunteer role or a new job. And nobody's ever asked me if I'm an introvert or a extrovert. And I think that asking that would actually impact how my volunteer position would go if I wasn't so open about it. And so asking about your volunteer as a whole with those positive experiences and saying, you know, what did you like about the last atmosphere? If you knew that I liked the virtual environment and I was able to explain that I like being, you know, more behind the scenes than up front, then you can gear things towards that. And we can also learn best practices from other organizations. We can form new ideas or new ways or bridge communication gaps, or it can be as simply as learning a new cool way to thank a volunteer. See my example, Martisha. We actually had a new volunteer start, and she was going to be at a VA hospital, like far away from any other volunteer. She was like in the middle of nowhere. And she suggested a traveling bear. And this traveling bear, we ended up sending it to all of our volunteers and our 3 staff people at the time. But it traveled around and people took pictures. It went to events. It ended up on social media, right? And every time somebody got it, they put a pin on it. And while we did have to pay for the shipping, right, the mailing of said bear, overall, it cost us less than $300, right, for a year's worth of fun. And so $300 for a year's worth of fun was definitely worth it to kind of thank our volunteers and get them all engaged. And it's those positive work environments for our volunteers that they're going to remember and that they're going to take with them should they go to another nonprofit. And we want this good feeling to be around for everyone. So we are now going to get into orientation questions.
Actually, Sarah, I want to jump in real quick because I want to point out something that was on the chat here that Ruth shared with us. I think is really important to observe here too. I'm going to read what Ruth wrote. He said, "My dad has Alzheimer's, so I brought that to volunteering with the association, but may need to be monitored so I don't see everyone's experience with disease as like mine." I think there's another reason why people get involved in stuff. And real quickly, I wanted to acknowledge that that's another thing, particularly, you know, those personal experiences bring people to things. And we want to make sure that we're being smart about those folks, you know, and really acknowledging the personal experiences too. So just a quick jump on there, Sarah. Sorry to interrupt, but like I said, I thought it was important to kind of observe or really acknowledge that point because I think it was a really good one.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you for monitoring the chat. So now we're going to get into orientation questions. The volunteer has actually decided to volunteer, woohoo, and you're getting them ready to work for your organization. They are sitting across from you wide-eyed and ready and excited. Are you going to focus on what you need from them, or are we going to focus on how we can make their experience better? Let's start with 2 very important questions. The first one Brian is going to cover, what are their expectations of the position or role they are getting?
And this is one of those questions that we actually kind of got previewed on before. So thank you for mentioning that earlier. I apologize to forget who brought it up earlier. But yeah, expectations are a huge part of what we work with volunteers. No matter how real you make the job description or other materials shared with the potential volunteer, once they show up, expectations will come into play. You know, I use the animal shelter, so I realize I'm using this again, but you know, someone who loves animals will come to the local animal shelter with thoughts of playing with puppies every day. You know, they think it's, you know, that's what it's going to be all about. You tell them it's about so much more than playing with puppies. It's about cleaning kennels, walking them, cleaning up after them, you know, bathing them, potentially administering medicines and other requirements to keep the animals alive and safe. You know, that's really the job of let's say that shelter. But you know, this person, you know, watched the ASPCA commercial with the Sarah McLachlan soundtrack, and you know, they're going to come in and they're going to make all the puppies happy and cheer them up and, you know, make them feel great. It's not just about the fun stuff usually. I mean, every organization has those the work that actually needs to be done. And that's what we're actually asking people to, you know, to do. Many organizations with established names suffer from this. You know, the Red Cross definitely has people that show up thinking that they're going to be doing something very specific for the Red Cross. You know, we certainly fall victim to that. what does your organization's name or reputation or established branding do to create those expectations? Something that you want to think about. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah, who I think is going to actually kind of get us into more of a question for the group.
Yeah, so what are some expectations of positions that you've run across? Something that, as somebody gets into it, they were like, I did not expect this was going to happen. What do you think?
You can go ahead and come off mute or respond on the chat or however.
And maybe you guys are all perfect, and I'm joking here, I like the word perfect, and how you guys do your induction, so nobody is unsure. But I will be honest, I'm going to stick with the puppy thing, and I'm going to bring up a bad example that happens at the Red Cross often with new volunteers. Fires happen at homes every single night somewhere in the US. And one of the things that happens is humans get out and animals do not. And so I know that volunteers are not put the expectation of the role that they are in to deal with families that have just lost a pet in a home fire. It is a hard thing to deal with, and I lose volunteers left and right after that happens, because no matter how many times I can explain it, that expectation is not clear enough. And we all have those things within our nonprofit that we just do not explain clear enough for the person to be ready for it when it happens. So this is where induction and ongoing training, those orientations really do help. Setting clear expectations on day one and every day beyond. So the second question is that you need to do with that orientation is find out what they know about your organization's culture. Culture and fit is a significant factor in meshing a volunteer with a nonprofit. We have to make sure that they understand what your day-to-day culture is. I have recently been thrown into the startup world, tech startups to be exact, due to some changes in my career. One of the things that I've learned over the last year is that tech startups, because they don't have a lot of money, right? They're getting donations or investors on their side for just like nonprofits are. So they're spending somebody else's money. And so they have to figure out ways to make their culture someplace where somebody wants to work without paying them a whole heck of a lot. And that's why some of these tech startups have ping pong tables in their lunchroom and different things like that that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, but get people involved and make it a fun culture. We need to start thinking about that with the organization on what our culture is and what does that say to our volunteers. Do they come in and do they sit in a desk and not talk all day because your culture at your office is to just do the work and be done? Is it very, fun and interactive and makes a volunteer want to come back? So all of those things have to be considered. And now we're going to get into how does your organization's culture contribute to that actual volunteer's experience? And I'm going to hand that over to Brian.
Absolutely. No, I mean, really what we look at is, what are the positives and negatives of that cultural, that organization, your organization's culture, it can create your reputation. If basically, if you're an organization whose culture is to meet the objectives of your mission, that's great. But how are you accomplishing that? Are you utilizing a small group of people that are actually, really, doing a whole lot of things, and wearing them down, trying to get through that, looking at it as a short-term problem, but really it's a consistent problem. If you create culture like this, people are less likely to seek you out as an organization. So we want to find out that we're making sure we're putting those positive things out there. Basically, making sure that we're creating a culture that people want to be part of. Really my question for you guys, and it's really not so much one that I want to answer as much something as I want you to ponder, it's really two questions. Number one, would I want to volunteer here after working a full-time job, taking care of family, doing all the other things that I need to do, basically looking at our volunteers, from their perspective, with the precious hours that I have left, would I want to be part of this organization and really doing the things that we're doing here? If the answer is no, what can I do to change those? What can I do to make that culture better? And like I said, I'm not necessarily expecting anybody to come off, mute or anything like that. Obviously, these are kind of deeply personal questions for you and your organization. So I don't want to necessarily have anybody calling out anything along those lines. But think about all those different things. Barb mentioned we're all inclusive. We try to accommodate all abilities, families, ages, and capabilities. 100%. And I think most organizations really do strive to do that. Some succeed better than others, though. I'm guessing Barb, since she puts that forward, definitely has that front of mind. So I think that's great. But what are those things that you think that really influence people, bring people in, and particularly as they inquire about your organization and they start to learn about that culture, what are they hearing? What are they saying? And is that something that's going to be interesting to them and something that's going to be good for them? But yeah, like I said, if that answer is no, what do we need to do to change that? And I think that's the important question we need to ask.
Brian?
Hey, Barb.
I think one important thing that I've learned to know when I do outreach programs, when recruiting volunteers, you need to, of course, ask what they would want to do. However, I think in my position, seeing that we're such a diversified conglomerate, for lack of better things to do. I mean, we work indoors, outdoors, we've got tech things, we've got all sorts of
the broad encompassing kind of thing.
Exactly. We've got so many venues that a person can, volunteer at. Pre-COVID, we used to host district-wide events that, 1,000 people or 2,000 people might show up in a day. And in recruiting the volunteers, I looked at them and I said, what do you like to do? Well, I like to ride trails. Okay, so you could be a trail sentinel. If they're not sure, if it's a young person, and I don't want to box this in, but typically a female, they're more crafty. So if they're a young student, say in junior high, high school, I say, what do you like to do? Oh, I like to do craft. Well, we're having this type of an event. We could use somebody, working with the kids with the craft table. Or if they just don't know, I invite them to come out to an event and say, hey, why don't you just come out and see? I'll be there.
Yeah.
You could shadow a volunteer. I'll hook you up with somebody, or you can just wander around and see what we really do. Maybe there's something within that event that you might like to do.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that. And Ruth, I agree that we need to describe it well. We need to, Billy just did the same thing, yes. And we are going to move on, though, to retention questions. I think these are self-explanatory. We want to retain our volunteers, right? We want to keep them. We don't want them to leave us. And what are some questions that we need to address for that? First and foremost are, what are their goals? This is more than motivation. This is kind of very specific on where they see themselves longer term at the organization. They may not know where their goals are right on day one, right? But a month or two in, the conversation has to happen. Someone may come in to fill a receptionist role, which is, a simple, answer the phones, whatever. But then they realize that logistics, right? The logistics guys are always doing the fun stuff. They want to do the fun stuff, right? And so they're like, we want to go over there. But did anybody give them that opportunity? Do you allow them to change positions? Do you allow them to learn new things? Or do you need that receptionist role filled, so you're just kind of pigeonholing them there and keeping them there? We need to ask if, do they feel comfortable to change the position? So, maybe they want to try it out, but they want to know that the receptionist position will be there for them if it's still available, right? They still want to be able to go back to that if they try logistics and it's not working out. But also, do they feel comfortable coming to you with the question? maybe they don't even realize it's an option. Maybe they feel like the door is closed. So let's make them feel comfortable and see how we can utilize those volunteers and get their goals to where they want them to be. Are you expecting them to stay in one position forever? I know that we've been giving a lot of examples with the Red Cross, but that is where our current experience is. But at the Red Cross, if you're not a supervisor in your role within a year, people are like, what are you doing? Because that means you haven't been encouraged and you're not taking the right classes and you're not doing the things. We don't expect you to stay in one position forever. In fact, we don't want you to. We want you to learn all the things and eventually become the CEO and whatever. I'm joking, but point being is, you can go all the way up to the top if you want to. And finally, having that open dialogue, having regular reviews and giving regular feedback will encourage them to figure out what their longer term goals are with you and help you talk about that. Just like with a regular job. I mean, some of us are volunteers on this call, some of us are paid, but we've all had a paid job at some point, even if we worked for McDonald's in high school. And you had that review, right? You had that concept of getting feedback on how well you're doing, but also being allowed to give that feedback about how you're feeling the job is going also. And that helps you develop your goals and make you realize you don't want to work at McDonald's for the rest of your life. And that's why we're all here today. And this allows us to get into the next question, which is, what do they actually hope to learn or gain from this position? And I'm going to hand this over to Brian.
Yeah. Obviously, the ability to, to learn and to grow into a position is something that is kind of very near and dear to my heart. Learning and growth can happen at any age, any education level. We want to encourage all of this, but what does your organization give back to its volunteers in the areas of learning and growth? For example, the origin, like I kind of mentioned earlier, of me coming to the Red Cross was, wanting to be involved in emergency management, wanting to be involved in disaster related things. My first position was actually an AmeriCorps position with Red Cross, and then from there evolved into a paid staff position and so on and so forth. One of the things that should always be offered, are ways for your volunteers to grow and learn within the organization and to better serve the organization so they can better serve the organization and the community. At the Red Cross, we give anybody that does 10 hours of volunteer work, they can go ahead and take our CPR and first aid training, just kind of as a benefit to them. As Sarah mentioned before, we're definitely, all about upward mobility. If you've been there for a while and you demonstrate, ability and competence in the things you're doing, we're going to start telling you about, taking some courses, doing some different things, going ahead and being promoted to a supervisor. Sarah, did you want to offer up an example or, something you've seen?
Well, sure. I also want to just mention though that the learning and the hope to gain doesn't have to be structured educational programming. So I have worked for military nonprofits in the past, and one of them that I worked for was had a concept where we shadowed different team members a few times a year. I'm not unsure if they still do this, as it's been a few years, but we used to match volunteers up who were running events in rural areas with those that were matching them up in more urban areas. And we would have them be on each other's meetings for the planning and doing all of that. And this was a way to have them grow and learn and come up with ideas they never thought about before. Because it was food distribution. So food distribution in a rural area was planned a little bit differently than urban areas. And so we wanted to make sure that they had different ideas, different ways to do it. And they loved it. It was a great way for them to not only grow and learn, but to get to know some of their counterparts in other parts of the country also. And this leads us into our final slide of retention questions. Woohoo. And this is something we've hit a few times in different ways now. However, these are important to ask directly. And I'm going to give a quick example. Last week at my current job, I'm at a startup at the moment. We actually had to let our CEO go after a few trials and tribulations happened. This is an oddity for sure, not a normal situation to just let your CEO go. However, our interim CEO asked me at a one-on-one call, how are you feeling and what can I do to make it better? Completely different than the questions I will show you on the slide, but it was sincere. I felt he truly wanted to know. And that's the thing we have to take into consideration. When you ask a volunteer, are you happy? Are you engaged? Are you fulfilled? Those are generic questions and you can figure out a better way to answer them for you. But the concept is to be sincere and to actually care about the answers you're receiving. If the volunteer says they're happy, ask why. If they say they're unhappy, ask why. Having those answers will help you move along because volunteers don't have to be here. That's the thing that we have to keep into our head. Nobody has to be at a nonprofit, even the paid staff. But volunteers don't have to be here day to day. What they get is happiness, engagement, and fulfillment. Those are the things that we can give them, and we have to do it well, and we have to ask the right questions that we've discussed here in a variety of ways to get to that point. So right now, it is 9:25, and we have not hit our COVID slides. So I'm going to ask Billy, do you want to have us do our COVID slides after a break, and we'll have that be the start of our discussion? Or do you want us to get through them now?
You can go ahead and deliver them. That's just fine. If we run a few minutes into the second half, that's
Okay. I just wanted to make sure how you wanted that to run.
yeah. Thanks.
All right. So we did add the COVID slides as an addition because those questions are definitely important in today's world, as we are well aware. So I'm going to actually hand it over to Brian to start these, and then I will wrap it up.
Yeah, obviously COVID's a thing. I don't know if you've heard of it or not. No, it has definitely been, presented a unique and unprecedented challenges for anyone who relies on volunteers to get the jobs done that need to get done in their organizations. We talked a little bit about the word pivot, which I think is such a appropriate word for so many things that have happened over the past year. How many people have had to, pivot those job skills into something different because of COVID? And I'll ask if anybody's got a quick example of that, either in chat or if they want to come off of mute.
This is Ruth.
Hey, Ruth.
Yeah, I am a community educator as a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association. And so I don't go to groups right now face to face. I have to figure out how to work with the tech person who's going to put the slides up on a virtual presentation and then feel like I've somehow engaged with the people who've tuned in, although I can't see them and we can't have a dialogue.
Ruth, perfect example. And honestly, let's face it, if we were in different times, we'd probably be doing this all in person, at a facility somewhere where we'd be presenting this thing as part of a conference. So Ruth, your example is spot on. And it's a lot of the things that in my organization that we've had to do too. And Ruth, and I'll put you on the spot here. This has kind of opened you up to doing different skills that you haven't done previously, correct?
Yes.
Challenging you in different ways.
Not all comfortable.
Absolutely. And we've asked that of a lot of our folks. I mean, for, like I said, I oversee disaster response. Before COVID, we would go out and meet people at the point where the disaster happened. Typically in a home fire, we'd actually meet them at the home. They're, literally the fire department's still there wrapping up, and we're sitting there meeting with them. We've had to pivot to, not being there and actually calling them on a phone and walking them through at that point. Even when we have to deliver materials, we can't actually go ahead and give those same kinds of empathy things. Red Cross is big about giving hugs and different things like that. We need to be safe, and really, and here's something that I think that I suspect has impacted a lot of people have heard too, is recognizing our volunteers' valid assertions that the way we're doing things now isn't as good as the way we were doing it before. For example, in our situation, the the ability to convey empathy, the ability to really, do those things that really make, make people know that we care is somewhat stunted by the fact that we're doing this over the phone as opposed to doing it in person, and really, being able to be in the moment with that person and being able to kind of, help them through a very troubling time in their lives. We've had a lot of different challenges, and I'm guessing most people here have faced some very similar situations to that. In addition to that, we've been dealing with this for over a year. Has anybody had to deal with any organizational changes since last March? I suspect a lot of you have. We were on the verge within a month of when we actually shut down for COVID, which was last March, from merging our two regions together. We had a northern and southern region for Illinois. We created an actual Illinois region. This is a plan that had been, it had been taking place for over a year prior to that. And April of 2020 was when this was supposed to actually happen, the beginning of April. We had to follow through with that because we were too far along to even consider, stopping it. Then, of course, we rolled into a very busy year where we had a lot of disasters, hurricanes, wildfires. We had a large scale derecho, if you remember last summer, that came across Iowa and Illinois, created a lot of damage, a lot of problems for people. Then, of course, just before the year ended, we decided to migrate to a new client case system. A lot of different learning curves, a lot of different things. So we've had to deal with a lot of different things. I suspect you guys have too. Go ahead and hit the next slide. So now we're at the precipice of another turning point, with more people being vaccinated, with hopeful future, ahead of us. What does your post-pandemic plans look like? Do you have volunteers who have been dormant since the start of COVID? I know we do. Have you been touching base with them? How do you plan to re-engage them? Bringing it back to what I was talking about before too, how are we going to deal with the fact that we've done some serious organizational changes? Different people are in different positions. We have different systems in place. We have different people involved in different things entirely. How are we going to go ahead and convey those and get those people up to speed? In addition, and these are questions we need to start asking our volunteers, have you gained any new skills or anything else that could benefit from, to the mission? Ruth, I know you just came off, you mentioned the fact that she's been doing a lot of, virtual stuff. By nature of doing that, you've actually acquired some new skills. You've done some of the things that are different. Have your life circumstances changed since the start of COVID? Funny story. I mean, Sarah talks about it herself. She actually, when we submitted the proposal for this, was working in a nonprofit and is now actually working for a tech startup. She by far is not the only person that has had that change over the past year. Some people went back to school, some people did different things like that. The other thing we're going to have to ask is, are they comfortable working in person if the job requires it? We do know that there's certain people that are still, a little uncomfortable being amongst people, particularly, when, we're not sure, we can't test them, we can't do anything like that. We just kind of have to rely, take it on faith that they're, being smart about their own health. And do we need any modifications or accommodations to resume your job in a pre-COVID way? Things have happened over the past year. Does that change who they are? These are some of the questions that we want to ask, and there's probably some others you can think of specific to your things. But I'm going to actually question here. What's the one question I didn't ask? What's one question I didn't ask of volunteers as we're re-engaging them, as we're bringing them back in?
I think you need to say it.
The one question I didn't ask is, have they been vaccinated yet? Or what their vaccination status is. It's tempting to ask, but it's a tricky, kind of a sticky wicket, if you will. Be sure your organization is prepared to handle that kind of information, which is considered privileged medical information. Have a plan. If you're in doubt, I would recommend not necessarily gathering that information, but something to think about as you're moving back into it, because it's going to be very tempting for us on a level to say, to start saying to people, hey, have you been vaccinated? Hey, have you taken care of that? But we have to deal with the ramifications of actually starting to gather medical information. Sarah can actually tell us about a very real scenario that's playing out at her current organization right now.
Sure. So I'll give the story, then we'll do our wrap up, and we can get into our Q&A at the end. But the current organization that I work for encompasses 11 countries, but one of those happened to be in India. And India has a little bit of a different way of handling medical information. It's very open. Like during the interview process, you can ask them if they have any medical issues and if they have children, that can impact your hiring. And I'm like, oh Lord, can you imagine if that happened over here, right? So one of the things that we're dealing with though is that pivot point of when is it appropriate to ask and when isn't. And unfortunately, in the US, medical information is privileged information. People can give it voluntarily, but unfortunately, we need to be careful about asking it because it could seem like we are discriminating against people who are vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And we need to make sure that we have that fine line. Kate just said, if certain positions do require traditional vaccinations, would adding COVID to the list be reasonable? And the answer is no, it is not reasonable because the COVID vaccination is not FDA approved. Only FDA approved can be required for traditional vaccinations. I can't guarantee that that won't happen in the future, but right now it is not a traditional vaccination. So you want to be careful about that. So the other thing is you know, if you are in doubt, ask your doctor, ask a nurse, ask somebody to say what is privileged and what is not when it comes to asking about medical things. So at this point, we can answer a bunch of additional questions in the next session. And look, now what? That was what I was supposed to click on before. I apologize. And so now we're going to wrap up and do our thank you. I do thank you all for listening. This was wonderful. And I know that Brian and I enjoyed putting it together and presenting it. And we thank you all for being here. These are our emails. Feel free to email us or find us on LinkedIn or do all the things. We would love to hear from you if you would like. And we look forward, we're actually going to stay on for the next session because I would love to be part of the Q&A. So I look forward to talking to you guys, and we will definitely be here to answer any more questions about COVID if and our experiences if you guys stick around.
Yeah, and thanks for being such an engaged audience. I mean, it really, I know it wound up taking us a little bit longer, but I'd much rather have that because I love the back and forth and the hearing different people's experiences. So it was wonderful to present to you guys. You're a great group and really had a lot of fun being part of this.
I just want to say again, thank you so much, Sarah and Brian, for leading the first half of the discussion and sharing your knowledge. Really great questions to think around. So that brings us to the second half of our session this morning, where a moderated discussion will be led by Martisha Brown. She's the Director of Advancement for the Rockford Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. So welcome, Martisha.
Thank you. I didn't know if we needed to take a quick, maybe 5-10 minute break. I think that'll be good. Take a quick break. Let's refill in our coffee and come back for some really, really good discussion. So let's plan on maybe, let's say 9:45.
That sounds perfect.
All right.
All right, thanks.
I would also encourage, as we wait, if you guys have any specific questions for our speakers, feel free to throw those in the chat and we can definitely ask them those questions when we get back from break. Just a couple of more minutes. Give it about 1 or 2 more minutes.
Not to put you on the spot, Martisha, but I will share, it was Martisha's birthday this week. So if anybody has any birthday wishes to share.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It's actually this month, Billy. I'm just going to
Ah.
celebrate for the full 30 days if I can.
love
Just kidding.
that.
Just kidding.
There's nothing wrong with that at all.
My dad does that. I just celebrate for at least 4 or 5 days. So today is actually the last day of my birthday.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I don't know. Celebrate it all. Get as much out of it as you can.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, we'll give it just about 1 minute, but if you guys want to start your videos, if you're able to, that would be great.
And Billy, I'd love to take your first question when we get everyone together.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Again, if you guys are able to join by video, that would be great, would definitely help in the conversation. And I guess I'll kind of hand it off to Brian. I think Billy had a question that you wanted to kick us off with.
I did. Yeah, I was thinking around, you had discussed an example of training volunteers for unexpected events. So the example you had used was comforting a family after the loss of a pet during a house fire. That's not something that most volunteers would even think might come up. So I was wondering how you learned about other similar unexpected experiences from your current and past volunteers to help inform your future orientation and onboarding.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for the things we do, we're dealing in true disasters. You know, I mean, we're dealing in different things, and it's home fires, it's hurricanes, it's wildfires, it's people dealing with, as I typically tell people, the days that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. You know, I mean, they'll remember the day that this thing happened. So really, a lot of what we want to do is, you know, we can talk about specific examples, but I can tell you one of the big things we do for training is we do a class called psychological first aid. What we're doing in that is we're actually preparing people and giving them the tools to help themselves work through those different things. Now, does it deal with all the things? No. I mean, are people absolutely going to be, you know, and giving the perfect example of, you know, dealing with the loss of a pet after a house fire? I can deal with all sorts of different things. I have a dog. I'm very much a dog person. You know, I've been on, situations where pets have been lost, and yeah, it definitely bothers me. It's not the kind of thing I want to see. But by giving that training and by talking through things, because the other thing we do, of course, is we also, we have a structure where when unusual things come up, or if you just need to talk some things through, you have, different levels of, supervisors, managers, different regional folks, up to myself, that's like, listen, call me when things get weird, call me when you need to talk something through. And I think that's also another thing that we want to do too, is make sure that we're leaving those lines of communication open for, for our volunteers, for those folks that are actually out doing those things, and saying, hey, listen, if something comes up that's a little weird or a little unusual or whatever, please understand the fact that you can at any time reach out and talk to me, talk to someone that may not even necessarily have dealt with these things, but have dealt with enough, similar things, or be able to kind of walk them through it and be able to help, kind of with that. But I think first it's really enabling people with that proper training. Like I said, I mean, for psychological first aid, it really does give people some tools to work through some things. And we do some other classes too, but I just cite that one as a specific example. I think Sarah's got something to add in on that.
I do. One of the things that we mentioned before is that if you volunteer for 10 hours, you get CPR for free. But some of the things that the Red Cross does, it has nothing to do with that, with volunteering. So psychological first aid is one of the courses that we can present to external organizations. So if somebody wanted to have that presented to their staff because something tragic or concerning had happened, we can present psychological first aid as an option to dealing with those things. Like, I would have to figure out who you contact. I don't have a name right off the top of my head, but if you email me, if that's something your organization wants, we can figure out who can present that for you.
Very interesting. I do again want to thank Sarah and Brian. Thank you guys so much. This was definitely a great session, a lot of interaction, so really appreciate it. I have a list of questions here that I want to ask the group, and I can also kind of share them on screen. I think visually being able to see them might help. So let me see if I can just do that really quickly here. There we go. All right, are you guys able to see it there? Perfect. All right, I'm going to kick off with this very first question here. And this gets into the conversation that we were talking about related to mission, your needs. I just want to ask you guys, how are you communicating your needs and your mission to prospective volunteers? Again, how are you communicating your needs and your mission to prospective volunteers? Kind of that first date. Anyone there? I might pick on someone a little bit there. Harlan, are you there?
Kate just unmuted.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kate.
Hey, yeah, I'm unable to share my video right now, so sorry about that.
No worries.
I just wanted to say that we recently redid all of our volunteer recruitment forms, and we're really rethinking how to get the message out about what we need, what we're looking for, who we want to invite. And so on our volunteer, I don't know exactly what we would call them, but I guess like job description or position description, at the top, we have, like, we state our mission, and we made sure that we're doing our best. Obviously, you can always improve, but we're just trying to do our best that in that position description, it talks about, maybe this requires squatting often, or maybe this requires speaking with the public, or maybe this requires knowing these certain skills. So we're trying to improve on that, but that's how we're currently trying to communicate that to people.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. I think what's also very, very interesting from Brian and Sarah's presentation was also talking about that culture aspect. So, they've seen the job description, they've seen the mission, they've probably seen your social media, your website, they know a little bit about the organization, but they get there the very, very first day. How are you guys communicating at that point in time and exhibiting? How are you exhibiting your culture and your mission of your organization? Does anyone have any good examples of that? Maybe even an orientation?
Share. And not where I work currently, but in a previous career, we had videos and brochures, which can come off a little dry depending on how you present them. But we did have a brochure with our mission and information about the organization. And then we had a short orientation video that we would start the individual off with before we would sit down and do all the paperwork and all the training. So that helped kind of inform their questioning as we went through.
Brian or Sarah, do you guys have any specific recommendations on how you really help to embody the culture of your organization when a volunteer is joining?
Sure. I want to let you know that this week when Brian and I really delved into what we were going to cover with culture, he and I went really back and forth on how we wanted to convey this. And it was actually very funny. But that leads to a culture of, you know, is your organization open to some of those direct questions, like the questions you don't necessarily want to hear, right? But the answer to your question, though, is with, and I'm using the Red Cross, but I'll go back to another one for a separate example. The Red Cross 100% puts all of it out there. Like it's on our website, you know exactly what we stand for and what we don't. And one of the things that we are very forefront about when people walk in the door is our neutrality concept. We are like, you know, Switzerland is supposed to be neutral. We're better than that. Okay. Like we literally have been in the midst of wars without taking sides. You know, same thing here with things that happen within the US. We don't take sides. We help people on both sides who need help, who need assistance, or on all 15 sides in a lot of conversations, right? Like, so there's not always just two sides. But we are 100% neutral. And the reason that that's important externally is, you know, everybody can see that. But internally, it's the same thing. And we have this conversation with all of our volunteers before they even start we you know, your background, your demographic, you know, who you love, all of that, we don't care. We are neutral, right? We are here to help somebody with a home fire. It does not matter, and I'm getting bold here. It does not matter if you're gay, purple, whatever, like it does not matter, right? You're helping somebody with a fire. You're helping somebody who just lost everything. And we are a team that is doing that. And that neutrality is every single day talked about. That's what we're there for. We're there for a common mission, and we push through and we make it happen.
That is so, so important what you mentioned, Sarah, just making sure from the culture and what's communicated to the public, we are open to all backgrounds, lifestyles. I think that's really essential. And it probably opens up the door for a lot of volunteers who maybe would be a little standoffish with joining an organization if it wasn't so welcoming.
And it really is. And Brian can give you an example, I'm sure, but we have been on disasters where there's literally a guy in a cowboy hat and a cowboy boots that had to leave his gun home in Texas, standing next to the transgender person handing out food, right? And you're just like, this is what the world should be like, right there, right? This is the world. And it's lovely to see, and it's lovely to be a part of. So.
Well, and I will say, kind of part of the other thing that we have both a blessing and a curse of is that we're a 150-year-old organization. You know, I mean, we have a long. I mean, Claire Barton goes back to the Civil War for goodness sake. I mean, we pretty much most people know the origin story of the Red Cross, if you will. It's a blessing in that respect because one doesn't have to really explain the Red Cross so much, you know, in detail as a lot of other organizations. It's the curse, though, because we have to maintain those standards. As a representative of this organization, I'm representing an organization that is 150 years, you know, in the making, has very, you know, exacting standards, has been able to maintain, you know, this stance of neutrality and, and really the mission and the whole thing through generations. So, you know, I need to make sure that I'm doing my part to uphold that, which can be kind of weighty at times. You know, but it's like I said, I mean, that's why I said it's kind of the blessing and the curse. different people's organizations might face those different things. You might be in an organization that is well recognized, easily identified, you know, but like I said, but you also have the weight of that culture and that whole thing that you have to make sure that you're maintaining, that you have to make sure. The other thing is you might be from an organization that people don't necessarily know much about, and then you've got to actually convey that and, you know, push that forward.
Very, very good points. Very good points. I do want to share with you guys that I am on, you probably see my face on the screen twice. I'm having some internet issues. So when I sit down, I have another option right over here. So I'm ready to roll. So if that happens, I want to go back to a comment, and thank you, Kate, for sharing this in the chat. She listed here, we also do volunteer orientations, and we invite existing volunteers to join, as well as an on-site tour to meet and greet with staff. And that really branches right into my very next question, which is, are you interviewing your volunteers, and who is doing that interviewing? And I want to share with you guys why this is so important and why this kind of branches together. We're talking really about that whole orientation piece and making sure they understand the culture. But I think the culture is first learned with their very first interaction, which could be an interview with your organization. So I just want to ask, is there anyone that's interviewing your organization, and who's doing that interviewing and that orienting? Again, is there anyone here that's maybe interviewing their volunteers? I think Sarah, did you go off?
I could answer, but it would be probably not a normal average nonprofit answer. So in the Red Cross, we have volunteer recruitment, literally recruiters that do an initial volunteer. And then for the disaster world, they're handed over to another department called Disaster Workforce Engagement that does a second run through before they're actually assigned to a position. So that's Brian's probably thinking there's 14 steps in between that, and there is, but that's the general version of it. So
share a little bit here. Again, not at the current organization, but at a previous organization, I actually saw a shift from us not interviewing volunteers to beginning to interview volunteers so that we could get a good understanding on not only what they needed, but also, are they a fit for our culture? I think we mentioned even earlier that there's a lot of our not-for-profit organizations that are run completely by volunteers. And so they're going to be the shifters and the shapers of the culture. So you really want to be intentional about that. When I think about interviewing the volunteers, again, just an example, we had an event and there was a Santa Claus that wanted to volunteer, and he probably was definitely an example of bad Santa. I apologize for that analogy, but he was not really the best Santa Claus in the world, wasn't the most friendly. Yeah, so it was definitely a learning lesson that from that point forward, we're going to be interviewing all of our volunteers to make sure that they're going to be a good fit. And along that same line, which is the second question here, is who is doing the interviewing / who is doing the orienting? I think this is very, very important. And that's why I appreciated Kate's comments on, volunteers are actually joining in on the orientation and they're getting the opportunity to meet the staff. I think these are very, very important things. I want to share just again another example, and this may prompt some thoughts that you guys have, but another example surrounding just orienting and interviewing. I have a friend, I just talked to her the other day. So it's pretty funny that we're having this discussion today, but she received a call to join a board. And they asked an individual who knew her probably 10, 15 years ago, they hadn't had any interaction since then, called and said, hey, we want you on the board. And her question was, why do you want me on the board? Now, she happens to be an African-American woman. She's part of the LGBTQ community as well. And she said, why do you want me on the board? And that person could not give her a true reason, or rather, I shouldn't say a true reason. They couldn't communicate as to why they wanted her on the board. And so I think that when we talk about, again, orienting and that very first contact, who do you have making that call? I see Sarah nodding her head. Have you had an experience like that as well?
Had to unmute myself. Yes, very much so. We've had some experience. This was probably 3 nonprofits ago, and I was consulting. I wasn't an employee, so I had kind of a tightrope I had to walk because it wasn't, my organization that I had a connection to. So they were doing some interviews for board members, and they narrowed it down from like 8 potentials. They were going to fill 2 slots, 8 potentials down to 2. And it was fine. But I need to bring this up. Both of them were African American. And when I asked at one point in time, I'm like, why did we narrow it down to these 2? I was literally told because they're African American. And I'm like, that is not a reason to have somebody on your board. Like, if that's your reason, you're completely off base, right? Do they support your mission? I mean, literally, like, there's a million questions to ask before that's your reason. And I literally had to bring it up to other board members because it was the wrong process for that interview, and they had to start over from the beginning. And I did keep the consulting position, but I was kind of, I didn't renew it. Let's go with that. I was like, I don't know if I want to be here. So.
It's so important, Sarah. It kind of gets into what you guys discussed before, like what is the skill set of that volunteer? And that's where you're going to start off so that they feel that they're valued when they're a part of your organization versus their sexual orientation, skin tone, that those are things that, it's important to have diverse perspectives at the table, but how about we look at the skill set of those individuals as well?
Exactly.
So a couple of comments here. Mary said, prior to COVID, we interviewed all volunteers, but now it's on Zoom, volunteer coordinator interviews. I hate to put you on Front Street here, Mary, but would you mind sharing kind of how things are going with the online Zoom, orientations?
Sure. Hi, good morning. We're not doing a lot of orientation because honestly, we're not doing a lot of volunteering. I work in a public library, and we shut down completely about a year ago, March 13th, actually. So all volunteering ceased at that point. So very few volunteers have been interviewed in the meantime because we want to bring back our seasoned people and our, those who are already with us when we can have the full slate of volunteers back with us. So, but a Zoom interview is actually kind of cool. I really enjoyed that. I feel like I get a pretty good idea, just as I did in person. But I would recommend a Zoom interview to anybody who wants to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a new day and age, and I think some of the uses of technology, such as Zoom interviews, might stick with us even beyond, the vaccinations once it's more widely spread there. So definitely appreciate that. I see here, Kate Brown said, we currently only interview if the position calls for them to work with you in addition to other background checks. So Kate, are you saying if that's like more of a position where they're working with youth? I see here, when they're working directly with youth, then there's more of an interview. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so currently we aren't necessarily recruiting for volunteers. So like I had mentioned before, we're just kind of, I don't know, getting our feet grounded again. But if someone applies to volunteer and they have the time and the desire, then we put them to work. But if they are going to work with youth, so if we're doing outreach or education, or if there's a youth volunteer in that same position, then we do have to get them what we call youth safety trained. And so they go through like youth prevention or youth abuse prevention training, and they get a background check done, and we do 3 references, and we do a sit down interview with them to make sure that that's the best fit.
Awesome.
So right now, there are some of us in the organization that do kind of feel like it's very hot and cold. You can come in and there's like zero I guess like interview done unless you work with youth, and then we know everything about you, kind of difference there.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, did Kristen have her hand raised?
She did, but I think we lost her.
Oh, okay. All right. I apologize about that. I have to switch from one screen to two screens. So I apologize if I miss. Feel free to unmute yourself and just kind of speak on out there. So I want to shift a little bit here on really that retention piece that was discussed by Brian and Sarah. And so I have a question here for you guys. It's kind of a selfish question because I want to know for myself as well. And I'm wondering, how are you determining if your volunteer is happy? What are you doing? And I got my pen to take some notes here. So
Can I speak on that, Martisha?
yes, go right ahead, Barb.
Renee is no longer with us as of Saturday. She has officially retired. Boo-hoo. I'm sorry, but she deserves it. I've known her for over 30 years, so it's like losing my best friend, but
I was wondering where Bud was at.
yeah, I'm really happy for her. But I know Renee always, after an event, she would always send out a blanket email saying, you know, thanks for volunteering. Without you, we couldn't have accomplished what we did. You know, your efforts are not gone unseen. And then she would ask you, what was good about the event? What did you see that could be changed? How were your reactions to the event? How did you enjoy being there? She would always, if she wouldn't, then the lead coordinator of the event would send out to everyone. And then annually she would send out a volunteer self-evaluation. Were you oriented properly? Do you get enough continuing education? Do you get enough safety information? And she would send out it was like very simple, but a 10-question questionnaire as to, you know, what could we improve with your communication with your, you know, supervisors, whatever, your job. Do you want to move on? Do you want to stay? And she was very good about getting back with her volunteers.
That's great. I kind of selfishly, Barb, I might email you to see if I can snag some of those questions because it seems like you're gathering a lot of really good information. Awesome, awesome. Anyone else? What are you doing to determine if your volunteers are happy, or just to communicate and see if they're happy?
Sure. The after action review is what we call it, an AAR. But we do it after every event. And it was actually, we did it in the military nonprofits I was with too. And then the Red Cross follows a government-esque kind of concept because we follow FEMA in some regards. And so that's why we do an AAR also. But the key to those are not just throw them in a drawer. Right. So, you know, you get the AAR, you get people's feedback and you do something with it. And the reason that you do something with it is because if people see you addressing the small problems, right, then they're more than likely going to bring you the big problems. But until they feel comfortable that the small things are going to get fixed, like, hey, we need more staples. Okay, I can fix that, right? Then, you know, you grow from there. And I'm being sarcastic a little bit, but if they're always on an event and there's no staples, but there's a stapler, they're going to be like, nobody's fixing this issue. Why would I take them the big things? And so just fix the small things as they come up, and then you'll be able to actually hear if something big ever happens. Just my perspective.
I loved, Harlan said, what is AAR? And that is after action review. After action review. I appreciate those comments, Sarah, because you said not only taking the survey and the evaluation and getting feedback, but you're also doing something with that information, and then you're making sure that they know that you're doing something with that information. I think that's the third step that sometimes we kind of skip over. It's like we made changes behind the scenes. No, you got to communicate and let them know that you've made those changes that they've recommended. That's a really, really, really great point there. And so I know we just have probably about 15 minutes here, so I want to just ask two more questions before we wrap up. And this is really based upon the goals of the volunteer. So I know we talked about, you know, when they're beginning to be a part of the organization. So sorry, just plug in my charger here. When they're starting to be a part of your organization, they probably want to be a part of the organization because they know who you are, They want to be able to give back. They're very, very focused and in tune with your mission. But sometimes you really do have to ask that question of what are their goals? What are their goals? And so I'm going to share my screen here with a question here that I have, which is, how are you determining what are their goals and what is their entry and exit plan? We love to have volunteers for 15 or 20 years, but realistically, those are some of our best volunteers, but that doesn't come along very, very often. So how are you guys communicating or finding out, do they have an entry or exit plan? What are their goals? What do they want to do? Anyone have any feedback on that?
Well, for me, I stand firm that it's a long-term discussion. You know, you ask them what their goals are at the beginning, and then you have to continuously do it. And I'll give an example of a volunteer that I worked with in Maryland. She had been a volunteer since 1983 when I walked in 2.5 years ago. 1983. She'd been through like every regime change you can possibly imagine with the Red Cross, right? And she knew where all the bodies were buried, right? Like she knew all the things. And it was wonderful, except it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago when she just started to be overwhelmed. You know, she now had grandkids. She was still being pulled in a million ways with the Red Cross, and no one was asking her if her goals had changed, right? She just felt there's nobody else filling this role. I need to do it. I need to step up. I need to do it. And she started getting angry, and that started coming out in emails, right? And it was just like this really weird concept that I had to sit her down and be like, what do you want? Right? And sometimes you just have to be forceful. And I know we want to be nice and be like, what are your goals? What are your whatever? But sometimes just sit them down and be like, okay, what do you want today? Right? What can I do today to make this better? What are your goals? Do you actually want to be here? And, you know, sometimes you just have to do it. And now it's a little bit easier, I think, with not a seasoned volunteer. You can kind of just casually be like, what's your goals? Yada, yada, yada. But I think with seasoned volunteers, sometimes being a little more direct with it can make a difference.
And that's such a good point, Sarah. I mean, I just think even personally about myself, and there's different skill sets that I've learned over the years, and maybe some I'm not as good at, but others I've grown to be a little bit better. And it makes me think about a church organization. We had a volunteer greeter, and she had been the greeter for, like you said, Sarah, 10, 15 years. And she just wasn't really into being the greeter anymore. And you could tell there wasn't really a welcoming vibe as she was greeting everyone at the door.
You never felt greeted anymore.
Yeah, it just wasn't as welcoming. So it's like, you know, we still want you to be able to volunteer at the church. What's going to be the best for you? And I tell you, that lady make a cake like nobody's business for fundraisers. So she turned out to be a very, very happy volunteer, and we found a good place for her. So okay, I just want to ask one final question. It's usually the first question we ask, but I just wanted to save it for the end. Does anyone have any aha moments or any takeaways that you plan on implementing? Any aha moments for you, even if we've mentioned it already?
I'm going to jump in here and say one of the things that I think that I've realized over the last year is, as we've been forced to look at things from different points of view, forced to doing things in different ways, a lot of things, you know, virtually, different things like that, we need to resist the urge to go back to just business as usual prior to March of 2020. Incorporate those lessons, learn those things, create, you know, the best of both worlds, if you will. You know, because we did learn some things. We did learn how to do some things better, in my opinion, over the past year, because, you know, opportunity presented itself for us to be forced into those spaces, into those situations. We can take some things away from that. Now, other things we're going to, you know, it's funny. We joked about earlier. I love doing presentations in person, and I look forward to, you know, doing something like this with all of you guys in a room. And I think there's a wonderful place for that. But we also have the opportunity to sometimes reach a larger audience if we do something like this where it's virtual, just as a simple thing. But I think we can all look at those situations and say there's certain things where we learned how to do things perhaps in a better way, and we can actually incorporate that into how we move forward with that.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Definitely agree with that. Good point. We don't need to get back to normal. We need to create some new norms, right, Brian?
That's exactly it.
Barb, I saw that you're off of mute there. Did you want to share?
Yeah, my aha moment, Renee always did the she did the interviews, but for the individual sites in our area, the coordinator at the site would do the orientation, because each area is an individual entity in and of itself as far as logistics on, how things are run, where things are at, and the like. But I like the idea of having current volunteers along with that orientation and or interview. I think that's a real good way to have the new volunteer know that, yeah, it's not all roses. There's a few thorns along the way, but you know what? We're here, we're family, we make it fun, we're professional, but we make it fun. So I really like that idea.
That is definitely one of my aha moments and takeaways as well. Anyone else want to share before I share my aha moment? Harlan, yes.
Yeah, well, 2 key volunteers in ER 815, Eliminate Racism 815, 2 of the founders of the organization moved. Reverend Board and his wife moved to Texas.
Yeah.
But because we've learned how to use Zoom, they're still involved.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's great to hear. I did hear that they moved, Harlan. So that's great to hear that they're still involved with the organization, and we're using technology to stay connected.
And they're coming in person to meet anybody who wants to meet them too. So.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. Well, I will share my aha moment, and then I'll hand it off to Billy there. I would say my overall aha moment was really making sure that you're connecting with the volunteer and understanding what it is that they want. I think Sarah mentioned, like, are they an introvert or an extrovert? So I'm thinking to myself, am I putting introverts like at the front door and I want them to be very lively, and that is just draining to them, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go home and take a nap for 2 days. I mean, I'm an introvert, it doesn't look like it, but when I'm out and about, I have to get a good nap in. And so it just is one of those things where I will definitely be much more conscious of, even if that person is outgoing, even if they're bubbly, ask them what they want to do and what they desire to do. So definitely a great takeaway for me. Brian and Sarah, I just want to thank you guys personally so much. This was definitely an insightful conversation. And I look forward to staying connected with you guys and stealing more of your ideas. So
Our pleasure.
I'll hand it back to Billy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Martisha, for leading the discussion. And of course, again, thank you, Sarah and Brian. I did want to share a couple more aha moments from the chat that you touched on, because we had some really great feedback. Jennifer had shared that she is working on reevaluating their volunteer interest form. So this presentation was very timely. So thank you for that timing. Kate shared that she was planning a self-evaluation form to add to their annual liability waivers. So that's a really good thing. And Marcia was discussing just building a better plan, a bigger plan to let the community really know who you are, because it's so true. It's a very important thing, and people often forget to pay attention to that. And if you don't help guide people and inform them, they will fill in the blanks on their own, and they may not always be accurate, which means you might miss good volunteer opportunities, or you may even have the wrong candidates coming because they aren't a good fit for your program. So just some great thoughts to share there. I'm going to share my screen. I have a couple pieces of information to share with you and information about next month's session. So we're excited to have Ron Kluwer join us next month. He's the Illinois Market President for Gorman and Company, and he's a very passionate community volunteer and does a lot of work around the community on belonging and organizational culture. So he is going to present on living and achieving the basics of belonging. So achieving organizational excellence, and that it's not just a concept or a program, but it's something that you actually have to do a lot of work to do, and it's ongoing work. So he's going to help lead us in some activities to help us do that in our own organizations. Some other things that we have coming up, we have an Access to Capital presentation on May 20th with Frank Walter, who is going to share information on how to think through identifying additional income streams, being ready for those, looking at possible financing opportunities if you're looking at scaling your programs and things of that nature. So excited to be holding that here. And it is our first in-person event since the beginning of March. I think our last in-person event was our Exchange on Volunteerism meeting in March of 2020. So really excited to be bringing folks back to the building. We'll be meeting socially distanced. If you have any questions, you can always direct those to me via email. And then we also have Mark Baldwin on May 26th is going to come and present a session on nonprofit media relations. So if you're working on getting that message out there and trying to make sure you're informing the community so they have an accurate perception of who you are, how to build relationships with people that are working in the press or journalists and leverage those relationships to get the word out about your mission and your programs and activities, this would be a great session for you to attend. So I will share information with you in an email about those, along with the link to the evaluation. And we do ask that you complete the program evaluation if you have a moment to do so. And again, thank you so much. We hope you'll have a fantastic sunshiny week. Bye everyone, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.